Today we begin our adventure into the world of parts work. Parts work is a phenomenally interesting field of therapeutic work. It is so interesting that I personally believe you could dive into the universe of parts work and discover new things for the rest of your life, probably many lifetimes, because as you're going to see, there are so many parts to explore. So as we always begin, let's begin with our diagram. Once again, I want you to become so familiar with this. I want you to be able to write it out, talk it through, because it is our meta map. So in order to make ourselves familiar with the space again, let's just do this once more with emotion, with feeling. We have receptors on the outside of our bodies. We have receptors inside of our bodies. Those receptors from inside and outside of our bodies are picking up data. That data is moving through our peripheral nervous system into our central nervous system. Our central nervous system then starts to process that data and try to figure out, is this an unpleasant sensation? Is it a pleasant sensation? Is it an arousing sensation or a calming sensation? And you start to go through the process of categorization and also drawing upon memories and past experiences to make sense of the data coming in. So your brain goes into this amazing, complex conversation to understand what is the data coming in. And it's going to call upon your past stored memories and experiences, specifically your socialization memories and your traumatic memories. So we're here. This is where you start to become aware of your internal state. The brain's communicating with each other. And if you actually go into the body, you could start to experience this data as the felt sense in the body, right? So you're inside of your body exploring sensation, information. And depending on your level of consciousness, you will then make a prediction, or the brain will make a prediction about what that information is. Now, if you predict that there is some sort of threat based on your past experiences and the data coming in, you may actually decide, okay, whatever this is may trigger a vulnerable part of myself. So I am going to elicit, and you do this unconsciously, right? You're not choosing to do this at this point until your awareness becomes stronger. But you may decide to set into motion a sequence of events that causes you to become protective. I'm going to talk a lot about this today. The protector self will then go on to dictate, well, actually, this whole relationship from interoception all the way to the creation of these protector selves will dictate the emotions that you feel and the behaviors that you engage in. And the emotions that you feel and the behaviors that you engage in will ultimately be felt in your life through the law of attraction. So I've broken all of this down, but this is all one thing happening. This is all one thing. It's your state of being based on your level of awareness, attracting back into your life the same frequency that matches what's going on inside of you. So we're going to begin our story talking about triggers and patterns. Because if somebody doesn't have a trigger, if they don't have recurring patterns, they're probably not coming to do healing work. And I just want to say, even those who come to expand their consciousness and meet God normally want to do that because they have challenges in their life that they're wanting to resolve. So they make enlightenment the thing that's going to help them resolve the pain that they're in. So even those people who present themselves as spiritual seekers are usually some of the people who have the most internal challenges to resolve. It's a beautiful thing, actually. Most people start seeking spirituality because of this. So triggers and patterns. I want you to, there's some diagrams that I'm going to share with you today that are my most favorite diagrams to date. And I'm going to tell you what to take note of, and I'm going to tell you what just to listen to and take out. So I want you to remember this. If somebody presents to you with any type of trigger, negative pattern, or problem, physical, mental, emotional, relational, etc., it likely has to do with trauma, socialization, or traumatic socialization. And I wrote likely there because I don't like to speak in absolutes, but I would actually prefer to say it definitely has to do with trauma, socialization, or traumatic socialization. And a couple of weeks ago, I spent some time at least giving you some definitions about the difference between socialization and trauma and traumatic socialization. So this is a diagram that I just want you to hold in your mind. I think it's a really nice way to help you communicate the spectrum of things, but really we could say the whole thing is traumatic. I just want there to be a spectrum so that we could define the different types of processes that we could apply for different, let's say, different levels of trauma. But socialization causes, in a very general sense, the rejection. It's the self-rejection process. Socialization causes you to reject aspects of yourself. Traumatic socialization causes you not only to reject but freeze aspects of yourself in the subconscious, and trauma, you freeze the nervous system. So if you have experienced what we talked about, that hyperarousal state that caused you to go into a freeze response, you're going to need to complete the movement at some point through somatic release. However, I'm going to start to bring all this back together so that you don't think about it in these compartmentalized in boxes or circles. So I've put here that, okay, movement therapy, inner child work, and parts work processes are the types of processes, the big banner processes that we are going to engage in to help resolve trauma, traumatic socialization, and socialization. So let's, before I move on, there are numerous different tools and techniques you can use for all three of these, including channeling, hypnosis, quantum shifting, internal family systems, breath work, body work, yoga, psychedelics, plant medicines. And the reason I'm saying this is because I think a lot of people go, oh, I'm going to go become a hypnosis therapist and I'm going to do hypnosis. And I just want to come back to why would you do that? You actually do a lot of these things to help ultimately resolve these challenges. So these are tools and techniques. These are bodies of work. This is what you're trying to resolve, right? So instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to become a hypnosis therapist, you've got to start to think that hypnosis is the tool that you're using to resolve the trauma, the socialization, to help bring people back into a state of wholeness so they can have a happier life. It's not that hypnosis itself is the thing. It's just a way to get there. Same with quantum shifting, same with breath work, same with internal family systems. So these are just tools and techniques. So let's have a look at these different major modalities. Movement therapy. So what's movement therapy used for in this context? It is used to unwind the freeze response through the nervous system of the physical body. As the person went in, so they must come out, is what Peter Levine says. So you've got to help bring that person out from the helplessness freeze state through the anger, the rage, the fear, the terror, the fight, the flight. That is all movement based, right? And it can be movement in the imagination or it can be physical movement. Both of those things together, fantastic. So a lot of the movement therapies and the somatic therapies that are out there, brilliant for helping go back through this. For those of you who work in the world of movement therapy, you got to get so peaceful, balanced, okay with anger, rage, fear, terror, and all of this stuff. Because when people are actually processing, as Alana could tell you, because she's been in the field of movement therapy for a long time, when they start processing their trauma in these classes, this is what's going to come up. And they really need spaces to do that. Now, think about how many yoga classes say that they're somatic classes, but you don't feel safe enough to do that in a yoga class usually. But there are certain practices that allow you to go through this. That actually has to do with the facilitator. That has to do with the space that's created for that. And then as you come out of that, we go through the renegotiation through that law of polarity. So we start to dance between the different sides of the nervous system, from sympathetic to parasympathetic. You can do that obviously in the mind, from safe place to threat. And you start to renegotiate the response to the situation. And there are numerous ways to do that depending on the trauma. Right? So if you're in a car crash, as Jacob talked about last week, you can renegotiate the situation by going back to before the car crash and playing out a scenario in which you actually don't go through the car crash at all, and you help to renegotiate the nervous system in this way. We didn't talk about this last week, but I want to add this here. If, for instance, you're healing from a trauma in which, say, a partner died or somebody left you, and that's not going to change on the other side of your healing session, I wouldn't suggest going back to before the trauma and creating an alternative ending where that person didn't die or that person does come back to you, because that's not actually a possibility. The renegotiation must be going through the grief process. It must be going through and actually accepting what is, so that you can renegotiate based on something that is, how the world is still going to be on the other side of that process. Does that make sense? We can talk about that more later, especially as we get deeper into specific cases. And you want to complete the hero's journey. So as you go through the renegotiation, you come out, you gain the wisdom from that, you complete the journey. It is not necessary to find a protective, vulnerable self. I'm just going to give you what the differences are here. You don't have to go and find a protective, vulnerable self like you do in parts work with this movement therapy practice. You can just go straight through the body to the felt sense. Usually I use the protective vulnerable self to actually go through those personalities into the body. Because when we actually do the parts work and you get into the vulnerable self, you'll realize we use the vulnerable self to get into the belief system to get into the body. But with the somatic movement, you can go straight through the felt sense like we did last week. We don't have to meet the protector. We don't have to meet the vulnerable. We go straight into the body. And we can process the frozen energy straight through the body. So the inner child is a part of you that's been frozen due to trauma. Same as in trauma, but we're just talking about the inner child. So through parts work, you can find the child. You go in, you find the child, and then you can help unfreeze them by completing the movement with the inner child. That's kind of the combination. This is the most complete process where you combine parts work with somatic therapy. All aspects of somatic release and parts work are included in the inner child process. And just so you guys know, I'm changing up the order of things this time around Inspire. We're doing parts work this week. We're going to do parts work next week, and then we're going into inner child. Then we're doing emotional mastery. Then we're going to go into expanded states. And then we have just parts work. So parts work processes is where you discover different fragmented aspects of the self and help to renegotiate the relationship dynamics between these different aspects of the self, right? I like to say there are 4 major stages to parts work. Again, these are meta stages. You've got the reclamation stage, where you've got to go and find and reclaim what's been forgotten, denied, rejected, or disowned. You have the resurrection phase. I brought this in from the hero's journey. This is actually the final sacrifice, where you end the polarities by not dancing, you end the game of polarities between one part and another part. So you sacrifice the game and you come back into harmony. This is where both parts kind of disintegrate and die. And then you move into the recalibration phase, which is what's on the other side of the 2 polarities becoming one. Let's say the merge, and then you have to allow your life to change because of it. So everything that your life has been reflecting back to you is a reflection of the trauma and socialization that you've been through. So when you actually heal, your life changes and you go through what feels like a death and a rebirth, not just internally, but in the external world. That takes some time. This is why the recalibration phase is really, really good to not only have gone through many times yourself, but to understand that when people start to truly heal themselves, their life externally doesn't look like it gets better for a while. It has to break down. Things change. People might have to leave the jobs that they're in, or their family dynamics change, friendships change, all sorts of things change. And that can feel like chaos for a period of time, but it is actually part of the hero's journey back home. And then we have recreation, which is the recreation of a new story. It happens quite naturally, actually, because you do the inner work, and then the story has to form around you in the external world. So these are the aspects. Some parts work processes will turn into trauma release sessions, and you will actually find that this recalibration, recreation, even resurrection will happen in all processes. All right, go back.
Good question.
Yes.
So inner child work and parts work are basically the same thing. Or let's just to understand. So parts work understood is a whole thing that we can use, and inner child work it sounds like it's just different name or like different aspects of like the inner.
There are hundreds of parts.
Yeah. And some parts we can call the inner child.
Yeah. There are hundreds of parts, and some of them are childhood aspects. Inner child work is when we work with the childhood aspects. When we're working with more adult aspects or more metaphysical aspects that aren't the inner child, then it's not specifically inner child work. For instance, we'll talk about it later, but you can do parts work sessions between the head and the heart. They're not technically inner child parts, but that's parts work. You can do parts work processes between your ancestors and your current self, So inner child is just a part of the whole spectrum of parts work.
Yeah, and the process is the same kind of, right?
No, there's many different processes, but ultimately the outcome is the same. The outcome is to bring fragmented aspects back into a harmonious relationship with each other. Let's keep going because we've got so much to get through, and I think I'll answer most of your questions. So hold your questions, and then I'll ask if you have any. So what I want you to see here is we've got movement therapy and a child work and parts work. Okay, let's bring that back into our diagram now so you can see where that's really sitting on our diagram. Over here, where we get stuck in the trauma response, which obviously affects the whole situation, I'm just putting the movement therapy is over here with the trauma response. Parts work is when we're working with fragmented aspects, and inner child work is where we're specifically working with childhood aspects inside of parts work. Here it is. We're coming up to my favorite diagram that I've potentially ever made. So I'm going to get you to write down the next one. Here are our processes. We have trauma work, we have parts work, we have inner child work, and we have the expansion of understanding through expanded states processes. These are our 4 categories of work. And we can put it in a diagram that looks like this. Favorite diagram, potentially ever, copywriting this one. It's so simple, and yet it puts everything in a map where you're going to go, oh my God, I finally get it. So let's have a look at this. What causes people's suffering? Trauma, socialization, and disconnection. Those 3 things are very interwoven. They are one thing in slightly different variations. So how do we heal trauma, socialization, and disconnection? Through somatics, completing the movement, parts work, the 4 R's, which is reclaiming, resurrection, recalibrating, recreation, inner child work, and knowing how to access expanded states of consciousness. There are the 4 parts of the work, and they are all together. Now, a lot of practitioners in the world go and study somatics, and they're like, somatics is the thing. And I'm like, no, it's a part of the thing. And then we have other people who are like, no, it's all parts work. Parts work is the way. And it's like, no, parts work is a part of the bigger process. And there's other people like, well, I learned inner child processes. Inner child process is the only thing. And I'm like, no, it's a part of the process. And then we've got the practitioners who are like, it's just about meditating into oneness. And it's like, no, it's a part of the process. You guys, I want you to be able to dance between these 4 things, integrated. All of them in a session, depending on what the person is presenting with you. This is what makes us so unbelievably unique. I've never seen anybody put all these things together. They're so busy trying to figure out the thing, the one thing that's going to be the solution, and it's not. All things exist here. You'll find that all bodies of work, back to the ancients, which Frank is telling me about, is in here. Total work. It's not just about expanded states or movement therapy or parts work therapy. It's about everything together. So we could say that as you begin to do this work, somatics, parts work, expanded states, so expanding the consciousness and inner child work, to heal your trauma, socialization, and disconnection, you go through a process. The first part of that process is you begin to heal yourself. You heal the relationship with yourself. It happens first. That translates very quickly to healing the relationship with others, which will expand out into healing the relationship with your culture, with society, and ultimately that will heal your relationship with nature, God, life itself. So it is a process, and no matter which one you work on, it all ultimately helps you heal the relationship you have with yourself, because these are all different aspects of self, even up to nature, God. This is everything. Once you begin to do enough of this with yourself naturally, you can start to help other people. And my hypothesis is that if you guys learn to become therapists, it will be the best way you could ever heal yourself. And you'll just, as an effect of that, know how to help others. So it comes together. All right, back to my favorite diagram of all time. Here we go. Adding everything together that I've said so far, how do we do this? Well, these processes, somatics, parts work, expanded states, plus how you're learning SPY, includes IQ, EQ, CQ, SQ, KQ. It's all in there. So our hypothesis is that as you actually expand all these different types of intelligence by learning about the processes, by learning about yourself, the biology, the fragmentation, the trauma, the parts work, the somatics, the expanded states, by learning, and then putting the rest into play in your meditations, you will start to expand your understanding. I am now throwing the word consciousness out and I'm replacing it with understanding, because understanding translates into your relationships with other people. So here's the work here. Somatics, inner child work, parts work. And what's the point of doing all this? We'll go back a slide. To heal your relationships. At the end of the day, we've been in a big discussion about this all week. At the end of the day, when you lie on your deathbed, you're not going to lie there and think, how enlightened did I become? You're going to ask yourself, did my enlightenment translate into the relationships in my life? How deeply did I love? How deeply did I allow people to love me? How kind was I? How present was I? How understanding, compassionate was I with other people. With other people, with nature, with animals, with Mother Earth, with culture, with society, you're going to give a fuck about your relationships. With all things, right? It translates into relationships. So at the end of the day, you're not going to be like, yay, I increased my IQ. Who cares? Unless that translates into your life, unless that translates into your relationships with people. How well did you come to understand yourself so that you could be with other people in a harmonious way? That does not mean people pleasing. That does not mean not having boundaries. That means having a very deep understanding of what truly is healthy and harmonious within yourself and with other people. So how's that? Bringing some pieces together, feeling like, oh my God, okay, I can see how these pieces are going to come together. I'm really excited about this diagram. 12 years it's taken to bring it into this simple diagram and be like, this is how the pieces fit together. Because I know when you guys get in sessions, your mind sometimes goes, which process should I do? Am I doing inner child work? Am I doing parts work? Should I go into expanded states? Depends. I want you to be able to dance between all of them and actually have a really clear understanding of when should I use this process? Well, let me make it really simple. If you realize the person gets to a point of hopelessness and freeze, guess what? You're in trauma work. You have to do somatics because they're frozen. If that person is presenting conditioning and problems that allow you to go in and talk to communicate with the different parts and they're not in a freeze state, great, you're in parts work. If you realize that part is a child, now you're in a child work. Right? And expanded states, we could call this the resourcing space. This allows you to resource, this allows you to expand, this allows you to gain bigger perspectives. Last thing I'm going to say before we dive into parts work specifically is that if you think, oh, how do I put this? Nothing is lost if you have spent years doing parts work, but you realize now, oh shit, I've got to go back and do somatics, because all of this works together. If you've been doing perspective shifting work for years, but you've never done somatics, it's not that you've done anything wrong, and it's not that anything's lost. It just means that now you've got to go do somatics. If you've been doing somatics all your life and you haven't actually learned to increase your understanding to know what's going on, cool, you just got to go back and add that now. It's all going to add. It's all going to add. And that's what integrative learning is. So no matter what you have done and what you're strong in and what you haven't done, same with your clients. If you have clients come in and they go, fuck, I've never done somatics, which means my 10 years of parts work has been useless. Say to them, no, that's not true. It just now you need to add. You just need to add. You need to integrate everything you have done. And this is what the ancient texts say as well. Any advancement in any one of these cues is actually going to add to your expansion. Nothing's lost. Nothing's lost. So now let's dive into parts work specifically. Parts work. Parts work is based on the idea that the human psyche can be shattered, which happens during trauma and socialization. And when we shatter those memories, we compartmentalize them into the psyche. We compartmentalize them into various what we call parts. Now, each one of these parts, which could also be called a memory fragment with different aspects of self attached, comes with its own distinct perspectives, its feelings, and its roles. We're going to go deep into this. Many of these parts are formed during childhood due to trauma and socialization. That would be in the child work. Although some are created in response to life experiences after childhood. That is just parts work. These parts can go on to influence thoughts, emotions, behaviors in profound and often devastating ways. The goal of parts work, obviously, is to identify, understand, and reclaim all these internal parts in order to achieve harmonious relationships with ourselves and the world at large. Parts work, therefore, is the most profound relationship work anybody will ever do. So you want to meet some of these uncategorized parts before they go into categories. Ready for it? Here's some of them. So if you're wondering how many parts do I have inside, well, just allow your eyes to run over the screen here and have a little look at some of the different potential parts that may exist inside of you and others. You may not be able to read them all, but if I'm not going to read them aloud, I just want you to run your eye over it and go, okay, can you see how different they are? There's positive parts, there's negative parts, there's whole characters in here, whole characters. Abused, avoidant, longing, persecuted, spiritual, friendly, the winner, the loser, the loner, the protective. We can call these archetypes. We can call them aspects. We can call them parts. Well, if you think this is a lot, well, here's some more. Just run your eye over this. Here's a whole bunch more of them. And you might be saying, well, how many parts does somebody have in them? Hundreds? Thousands? Many thousands? This is just 2 pages of probably 100 pages that I can make. Doesn't mean you need to learn every single part. I just want you to understand that there are infinite numbers of parts that can be created. It depends on the person's culture, their conditioning, their language, what they have access to, what movies they've watched, and how much trauma they've been through. The more traumatized somebody is, the more parts they've possibly created. And sometimes when the trauma is really big, you create 10 parts in one go. This is also the basis for people who present with multiple personality disorder. As you guys probably read this week, or maybe it's next week, everybody has multiple personality disorder. This is the personalities. We all have multiple personalities. The question is, are they disordered? Do they get along? Okay, so from here, let's have a look at how these parts will categorize themselves within the psyche. So this is how they get categorized and they get stored. And I'm going to take this from internal family systems because it's nice to know the language. So we have your personality, which I'm leaving as question marks because your personality is fluid and changes depending on how you're meeting the external environment. This is the language of internal family systems. We have the firefighters. I'm going to define these roles and the responsibilities in a second. So I'll just show you the categories and then we'll go into each one more deeply. We have the firefighters, we have the managers, and we have the exiled parts. And just based on having a look at the images I've put there, it gives you a pretty good insight into what these aspects are going to be. Exiled, obviously, in the subconscious. Managers, obviously, keeping things at bay. Firefighters are what turn up when you're under pressure or have been triggered, right? Okay, another way to look at this, I've put them in this way. So personality is in the center, changes, and you've got these different categories of aspects that turn up. So what I'm going to do is I'm firstly going to give you the other names of these parts because you will hear me change the names that I use and you'll hear other people change the names, but the roles and responsibilities stay the same. So the exiled parts, this is the core wound. This is the wounded child. This is the inner victim, the injured self, the hidden self, rejected self, abandoned self, forgotten self, buried self, repressed self, shadow self, vulnerable self, traumatized self, frozen self, lost self, pain body, as Eckhart Tolle calls it, the threat. So what are the managers? The managers are the prison wardens, the gatekeepers, the protectors, the monitors, the controllers, the strategists, the manipulators, the organizers, the maintainers, the taskmasters, the perfectionists, the overlords, the supervisors, the suppressors, the numbers, the avoiders. You do not need to write all this down. You have all the slides. I want you to get a sense through the names used of what these guys do, so you can feel what the managers actually are. And then we have the names for the firefighters, which is the reactive self, the defender, the protector, the warrior, the impulsive, the shielder, the deflector, crisis responder, distress controller, emergency protector, safety enforcer, stress responder, crisis handler, distress management, panic alleviator, the rescuer self. Can you get a sense of what this aspect of self might get involved in? This is when you have a trigger and they need to turn up. And then we have the personality, and this has been called many names as well. So we've got the ego, the facade, the mask, the false self, the fake self, the small self, the little self, the illusory self, the limited self, adaptive self, social self, persona, character, role, surface self. So I just want you to start to make yourself aware of all the different terminology, but really it's just this, right? They're just different names that different people use. And it's so funny. People are funny. They come up with a new name. They're like, I figured something out. Like, no, you didn't. You just gave a different name to something that the psyche has been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. So now let's look at the roles and responsibilities. I just want you to listen to this. Again, you could just hover listen, just let the information go in. Most of this you will already know. It's just to get a sense of these different aspects of self. So the exiled self. The exiles represent the parts of us that carry pain and trauma, right? Roles and dynamics of the exiled aspects. These guys are the bearers of painful emotions. They carry the emotional and psychological pain resulting from past trauma or difficult experiences, socialization. They encapsulate feelings of fear, shame, guilt, sorrow. that the individual finds too overwhelming to confront or integrate into their conscious awareness. All of these parts have experienced pain due to loss of needs. So now the psyche believes that all of these parts actually are going to be responsible for the feeling of pain that arises from losing needs. So you could say that all of these aspects, your psyche perceives, if they come to the forefront, will cause you to lose something. They're the guardian of vulnerability. Exiled parts protect the core self from experiencing intense vulnerability. They basically hold on to it and hide it for you. They maintain a barrier around sensitive emotions or emotions to shield the individual from re-experiencing the pain associated with past wounds, basically trauma, right? This protection is often subconscious and serves to prevent further harm. These guys are sometimes frozen in time, trauma. Exiled parts may remain stuck in the emotional state of the original trauma or event. They hold onto emotions, feelings, sensations, beliefs formed around traumatic experiences, potentially hindering personal growth and development. This frozen state can manifest as emotional immaturity or lack of progress in certain areas of life, because it depends on how the managers and firefighters turn up after that. Isolated and unacknowledged aspects. These guys are often isolated and disconnected from the rest of the internal system. They exist in a state of internal exile, where their presence and their influence may not be fully recognized or acknowledged by the individual. It's very rare that these parts can come through into the personality. It's the number one thing that when you're unconscious, you want to avoid. You do not want them to come through into the personality. This isolation can contribute to feelings of fragmentation or disconnection within the self. Right? So even though you don't want these guys to come into your personality because you perceive them as a threat, at the same time as you're holding them away from yourself, it actually feels like fragmentation and suffering, that they can't. So we're in this bind. It's between a rock and a hard place. They're triggered by similar situations. So these parts may be triggered by situations or events reminiscent of the original trauma. They reactivate intense emotions or responses associated with past experiences, potentially leading to emotional reactivity or avoidance behaviors in present-day situations that echo the original trauma. So when you are triggered, what's happening is that you are feeling one of these parts come closer to the surface. That's what a trigger is. When someone triggers you, they have triggered a pain body, one of these exiled parts. And here's the beautiful game of it all, is that they're at the same time yearning for integration. They don't just want to be hidden forever. They are yearning to come forward. They are yearning to be loved. They are yearning to be seen. They are yearning to be a part of your personality. They often seek acknowledgement and integration in the broader internal system. They want all their needs met. Despite wanting to avoid these parts simultaneously long to be heard, understood, accepted, loved within the whole unit of the family, of the relationship that you are, the internal family system. So integration involves healing and reconciling their pain with the core self to achieve greater wholeness and emotional health. So we're trying to bring these parts back in. So now let's have a look at the roles of the managers. The managers represent a preventative role. Managers are primarily focused on preventing emotional distress. They do this by managing and controlling various aspects of the individual's thoughts, behaviors, and interactions to avoid triggering past traumas or unpleasant emotions. This is what we call day-to-day adaptive behavioral patterns. Most people's daily personality are the managers. Most people's daily personality, just hear that. Most of the time, especially during interactions with other people, most of this world is so traumatized that they are basically managers. They're controllers, they are organizers, they're planners, they're strategists, and they're looking to be like, how can I best navigate this situation so that I'm safe all the time? So they're organizers and they're planners. They are meticulous planners and organizers, consistently strategizing ways to navigate through life with minimal emotional disruption. This might involve over-preparing, creating detailed schedules, setting high standards to ensure everything goes smoothly, depending on how your manager turns up. This is where the perfectionist mask kicks in. So these guys can manifest as perfectionist parts that strive for flawlessness in various areas of life, believing that mistakes or imperfections might lead to criticism or failure, which could trigger one of these parts. So then they try and become perfectionists so that they maintain their life and the person never has to experience the failure associated with an exiled part. Caretakers. These parts might take on the role of caretakers, prioritizing the needs of others to gain approval and avoid conflict, the people pleasers. So your manager might become a people pleaser. By taking care of others, they may aim to maintain harmony and prevent situations that could cause emotional distress. In fact, all the aspects of codependency come up in the manager role and also in the narcissistic role. Self-critics. This one's fascinating. So managers can be self-critics. This is your inner critic. This is your prison warden. This is that judgmental inner voice that you have. So self-critic managers also can be critical of the self, constantly evaluating and judging behaviors to ensure adherence to high standards. The self-critic is meant to prevent external criticism and the potential emotional pain it might bring. So have you guys heard of this before? If you experience trauma and pain through the interactions that you had with parents or siblings who were cruel or nasty, you may actually create an aspect of yourself that is like your mother, or that is like your father, or that is like your brother or sister, and they become a manager. And they bully you first before your parent or sibling has the opportunity to do it to you. You know why? Because it's far less painful for you to punch yourself and keep yourself in check than to allow your parent to do it for you, in a state of not knowing when that's going to happen, right? They've actually proven this in animal studies that, I heard Jill Swan talk about this one. There was an experiment, a pretty nasty experiment done where they used an animal, and I think there was an electrode in the cage, and they would zap the animals. And the animals eventually found that they could zap themselves in the cage. So then they started to administer the pain to themselves first and foremostly so that they could diminish the pain coming in from external sources. This is what the self-critic is. And this is what we do to ourselves. Prison warden is the same thing. I love the prison warden as an archetype. Prison warden is an aspect of yourself that if any of these exiled roles want to come forward, the prison warden will go to that part and say, get back in your cage, do not come up. Shut up, be quiet, do not come forward. We see this play out in dynamics where somebody wants to come forward and share their vulnerability, and another voice comes in and says, you know what happened last time you did this, put that away. And you close that down and put it back. This happens within that, you can see it in the person's face, in their psyche. Controllers. They exert control over the individual's environment and relationships. This can involve micromanaging others, being overly cautious, or avoiding situations where control might be lost. Now we move to the firefighters. These guys are crisis management. Firefighters act as immediate responders to emotional crises. What did I say up here? They are parts that intervene when the pain of the exiles surface, often using extreme or impulsive behaviors to manage the crisis triggers. Right? So you now are in a triggering situation and boom, your hyper bitch comes out. Boom, your mega aggressive personality comes out. Maybe your shutdown personality comes out. Maybe the firefighter becomes the victim. There's many different archetypes the firefighters can take on, but what they're ultimately trying to do is to mitigate the pain by responding to the crisis. So moving on, they intervene swiftly during moments of emotional distress to prevent overwhelming feelings from escalating and destabilizing the individual's emotional state. Basically, they're trying to stop you going back to trauma. They're trying to stop that freeze response happening. They're trying to be emotional regulators. They are responsible for managing intense emotions and preventing emotional overwhelm. So as you guys start to feel overwhelm in your life, you will notice that your firefighters start to kick in more and more and more often. So it'll look like you're being triggered more often, and you will say, oh, I'm overwhelmed, and that those defensive patterns will turn up more regularly, right? They employ strategies such as numbing emotions, diverting attention, engaging in impulsive behaviors to provide immediate relief. And so they're trying to restore emotional equilibrium. We could say that your firefighters are the parts of you that look most crazy. They're not, they're brilliant. But it looks almost unreasonable sometimes. They're very, people would call these the drama kings, the drama queens, the whatever, but this is your firefighter. This is first line defense. When too much pressure goes back into the system, not too much, but pressure goes back into the system, potentially triggering off the exiles. Distress suppression. So firefighters suppress distressing thoughts and emotions to maintain emotional stability. They actively work to push down painful memories or emotions that could disrupt the individual's functioning, often using avoidance tactics or denial to manage internal turmoil. Do you know how this looks sometimes in relationship? I've got to go straight into blaming you. I am going to avoid myself by making you the problem. You are the one. So the firefighter is the one that under pressure will go into blaming of another person because they want to put all the focus on the other person as opposed to looking at the extreme pain that is rising. And the more the pain that, the stronger the pain is that's rising is basically equal and opposite to how much intense pressure you'll put on the other person or intense focus you'll put on the other person, because the system is trying to make you focus on anything other than yourself. Protection from pain, obviously. Firefighters shield the individual from re-experiencing psychological pain or trauma. Their primary objective is to create emotional buffers and employ self-soothing behaviors to prevent deeper emotional issues from surfacing and causing distress. Although firefighters might look like they are causing more pain to the person, I guarantee that whatever they are doing is what's causing less pain for the person. So even though they might get aggressive or they might be doing what looks like crazy things, that is the strategy that they have to actually calm their system the most based on what they have available to them. Impulse control and acting out. Firefighters manage and sometimes manifest as impulsive behaviors during moments of heightened emotional stress. They lead the individual to act out impulsively as a means of coping with intense emotions, which provides temporary relief but may lead to long-term consequences, as you can probably imagine. And as I said before, distraction, diversion. They use distraction to divert attention away from the emotional distress they're feeling. They employ various distractions, such as engaging in activities, seeking external stimuli. They want to shift their focus from the internal distressing emotion or thoughts that are arising from within them into the external world. Okay, roles and responsibilities of your personality. I wanted to add this here as well. In terms of parts work, so integration and expression, the personality. This is the part of you that, I don't really want to pull this apart from the real self or the false self. A lot of people call this the ego, but what I want you to understand is as the personality, this personality here, expands to integrate all of these parts, it becomes more authentic. So it's not that you have the true self and the limited self. The limited self is an aspect of the true self, and it is just expanding and integrating back to the truth. So it's not two separate things. It's just that it is limited in its understanding, or you can say when the true self is fragmented, it's the false self. As the false self becomes more integrated, it will transform back to the true self. So integration and expression is a huge part of the personality's role. The personality integrates and then expresses the qualities, beliefs, preferences, and mannerisms that define how individuals present themselves to the world. It serves as the outward expression of the internal system, including the interplay of different parts. So the relationship between your firefighters, managers, and exiled aspects will manifest in your personality. That's what your personality is. It is the expression of your inner world. That is what your personality is, and it will change. Adaptation to context. So the personality is going to adapt and respond differently in different contexts, in relationship to different relationships, in different social environments. It's going to incorporate it incorporates the influences of various parts to navigate daily interactions, relationships, roles, reflecting a blend of protective mechanisms and authentic expression to the self. So can you imagine if you are super fragmented and you've got thousands of exiled parts and your managers are extremely strong and your firefighters are very defensive and you perceive the whole world as threatening? Imagine what your daily personality is going to be like. Now, let's say that you've done a whole lot of internal work and you have integrated a lot of your exiled parts. You have healed the relationship between managers, firefighters, and exiled aspects, and you have increased your understanding so that when you walk around the world, your personality is going to reflect that inner harmony. Cool, huh? So this is what the personality is. It does have a defensive mechanism role to it. The personality may employ defense mechanisms to manage stress, conflict, or emotional discomfort. It integrates defensive patterns from parts like managers and firefighters to protect the individual from perceived threats. So again, that depends on your inner reality. That depends on your level of consciousness. That depends on the level of integration. And it obviously plays a role in self-concept. So the personality contributes to the individual's self-concept and identity. It's what we can also call your personality. It's your identity. It reflects how individuals perceive themselves and are perceived by others, shaped by both internal parts and external influences. The personality influences self-esteem, self-image, and beliefs about one's capacity and worth. Okay, let me give you guys an example here. Imagine somebody has no idea about their fragmentation. They have no idea about their exiled parts because they're deep in the subconscious. They don't even, let's say they don't even really know their managers, but they do know some of their fiery firefighter aspects that come up all the time. Or actually, let's put that another way. Let's say they know one of their managers really well and one of their firefighters really well. And one of their managers is the good boy. And their firefighter is, let's say the firefighter is one that when somebody threatens the part of them that feels bad, they can explosively blame other people. So maybe they know these two parts of themselves very well. So they have an understanding of this manager and this firefighter. What this means is that they will perceive their identity to be this manager and this firefighter alone. And this is who they will say they are. They will say, well, I'm a very good person. I'm a good person. And when I perceive other people threatening me, I know that I sometimes explode and blame other people. That's who I am. Can you see how limited that is? And now maybe somebody knows a couple of their managers and a couple of their firefighters. They'll say, well, this is my personality. But imagine if you come to know the thousands of aspects of yourself and you know it's all you. How then would you turn up in the world? More plastic, more whole, more integrated, right? The more you know of yourself, the more you understand, the more your personality expands and changes, which is the whole point. Expression of core self. The personality can express aspects of the core self, including values, strengths, and aspirations. It allows for authentic expression of the core self's qualities and desires in everyday interactions and decisions, fostering alignment between inner values and external behaviors. Let me put it like this. You will begin to express more and more and more of your core self. Naturally, the more integrated you become with all your parts. That's what comes through you as you begin to heal the relationship with all these aspects. Before moving on, actually, no, I'm going to do it this way. Examples of parts that might be exiled and parts that might be created as managers and firefighters in response to trauma and fragmentation. So I just put this together. It's one example. So here's a bunch of parts, and let's put them into somebody's psyche. Okay, so maybe this person, I've put a lot of examples there, but maybe this person got in trouble for being unworthy or friendly or confident, or they're the persecuted self, or they experienced trauma around being magnetic or innocent or vulnerable or being too much or jealous or playful. Doesn't matter. Everybody's upbringing is different. So let's say that these are the parts that have gone into their subconscious. You're not allowed to be these things. Your creativity got shut down. Your sensuality got shut down. You're not allowed to feel unworthy. Maybe you had psychic abilities which were perceived as threatening and you got in trouble for them. And so you shut out your psychic abilities. Cool. So then you started to create some managers. Prison warden, we talked about. Maybe you become the activist. Maybe you become the leader or the strategist or the pessimist or the follower or the scientist or the angry one or the serious one or the stupid one. Or maybe you became the teacher, the avoidant. Maybe you became ugly. These are all masks. These are all adaptive behavioral strategies. Maybe you become the clown, the funny one, the confident one, the addict. Maybe you become the depressed. Maybe you become the sick, the rebel, the poor, the passive, the arrogant, the frigid, the avoidant of sexual interactions, weak, the doer, the inner abuser. These are all types of managers. And it depends on how your psyche works as to which characters you're going to put in these roles. And then the firefighters actually might be the binge eater. When you're under pressure, you turn to binge eating. It may be the comedian. See, some of these are similar. It just depends what your strategies are. If you go into extreme threat, do you start cracking jokes? Maybe that's what your firefighter does. Maybe if you go into extreme threat, you become the sacrificer, the people pleaser. I'll give everything up. Maybe you become the overly sexual. This is actually a firefighter aspect where maybe everything's so intense. So if you can divert the external pressure into your sexuality, you can actually mitigate certain challenges. Maybe you become harsh or protective or dissociate. You just completely dissociate. Maybe you start blaming. Maybe you play the crazy card. Maybe you play the stupid card. Maybe you become violent. Maybe you become extremely needy, weak, vengeful, hostile. Can you see how this is starting to set itself up? Just giving you examples, giving you examples. So these two here, managers and firefighters, are both protective. They just come out at different levels of intensity. So this is your protective self, these two rings, and this is your vulnerable self hidden in the shadow. And every person in every different situation will turn up differently. I was completely out of my mind to think I could do this in less than an hour. The dynamic setup of our inner world is what translates into the games we play as adults in our outer world. There is nowhere this shows up more obviously than within our relationship dynamics with others. So I wanted to bring this little piece in because we talked about it briefly last week. So this is the drama triangle. Want to learn a bit more about the drama triangle? This is an external manifestation of the internal world. So the drama triangle consists of 3 roles. Jacob brought this up last week, so I wanted to go into it a bit more deeply here. We have the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer. The persecutor's role involves blaming, criticizing, and oppressing others. The persecutor acts out of need to feel superior and in control. The victim feels oppressed, helpless, and powerless. This role seeks sympathy and validation from others. And then we have the rescuer. So the rescuer is the one who wants to step in to save the day. He or she wants to save the victim in order to fulfill their need of feeling needed or validated. This is external. So before you start going, oh, that's the shadow self and that's the firefighter. No, it's not. It's actually not like that. They're different things. So I'm going to show you this in another diagram in a second to see that this is the external manifestation of your managers and firefighters, actually. These roles are dynamic, and individuals switch between them depending on who they're interacting with and what the situation is. You guys have all played victims in your life. You guys have probably all played the persecutor and the rescuer at different times with different people. So it's a dynamic thing depending on the environment you're in. The drama triangle is a way to understand dysfunctional interpersonal relationships and the ways people try to get their needs met through unhealthy patterns. This drama triangle often plays out in relationship dynamics so long as the person has unresolved trauma or fragmented psyche. So if this is your world that hasn't been integrated yet, you will be in this dynamic somewhere in your life. Let's go into it a little bit more deeply. So these are what the different aspects, the different characters are trying to get met. These are the needs they're getting met by playing these characters. The persecutor experiences control, sense of power, authority over others to avoid feeling vulnerable. So they want to be in control. They don't want to feel out of control. Just have a look at how this fits into the human needs. They want to feel superior, validating their worth by feeling superior. So validation, certainty, clear and structured way to handle situations. So the persecutor is all about control, certainty, validation, self-protection, safety, recognition, validation, being noticed and acknowledged. Tony Robbins talked about this when you looked at the human needs. It said sometimes the most violent people in society were playing out that violence because it made all eyes on them. It makes them the most important person anywhere. It actually fulfills the need of importance, validation, and being seen. And being violent is one way to get those needs met. Do you remember listening to that? That was a powerful moment in the human needs module where it says, we have these 6 human needs, right? 6 human needs. Any activity that causes us to feel like 3 or more of those needs are getting met becomes addictive. Violence can meet those needs because it can make people look at you. It can make you the most important person. It gives you a sense of control. So sometimes being violent can be extremely addictive. And you will notice that your firefighters may choose violence as their method to get needs met. And that can become your addictive pattern in relationships. So you actually might become the persecutor within your relationships because you're getting needs met. Dominance, control, avoidance. It also causes avoidance. Because it distracts you away from your own feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. So that's a very narcissistic thing that people do. They focus their aggression out on others or their whatever it is in order to avoid feeling their own inadequacy. Rescuer, what does the rescuer get out of this dynamic? Well, they get validation because you're so good. You're so good. You get validation of your goodness. You get validation of your cleverness, your specialness, self-worth. It enhances your self-worth through the act of service. You're a good person. You get approval for being so good. You get admired for being so good. There is a level of control there. You indirectly are controlling situations and people through your assistance. So you get control out of being the rescuer. Distraction, once again, you're avoiding your own problems by focusing on helping others. You're the people pleaser. It defines you as helpful, kind, compassionate, good, and it gives you a sense of purpose sometimes, finding purpose and meaning through acts of rescue and support. Can you see how complicated this can become for people? It can be really complicated, right? And the victim. What does the victim get out of being the victim? Sympathy. Think about people who continuously play the victim in their life. Well, they actually get something out of being that. This is why some people do not want to change, because they're getting all their needs met out of being the victim. They get sympathy. They receive compassion and empathy from others. They're the center of attention sometimes. Validation, affirmation of their feelings and experiences is real and important. Attention, as I just said, they're the center of attention. Care, being taken care of, protected, looked after. They have an excuse. They're the victim. They don't have to do anything with their life. They don't have to take responsibility. They get to give up responsibility, which is the opposite of healing. Belonging, feeling connected to others through shared suffering. Avoidance of accountability. I'm a victim. I'm a victim of my mental health. I'm a victim of my insanity. I'm a victim of my neurons. I'm a victim of society. I'm a victim of culture. Can you see this game? This is the drama triangle, and we get deeply stuck in it. Now, who gets deeply stuck in it? Guess what parts of the self are playing out? The persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim. Your managers and firefighters. This is a manager firefighter game. This is not the exiled parts of you. This victim here is not the exiled part. This drama triangle is created to avoid being the real victim. This is why when you take somebody who's had the label of depression for years and years and years, and we say, well, actually, you haven't felt the pain deeply enough. This is why, because their victim personality is the depressed one, but they're using it to avoid the extreme feeling of unworthiness in the exiled space. So they actually have to go into the pain. They haven't gone in deeply enough. So when you meet people who play the victim, and you will when you meet your clients, because most of them are victims when they come to you, you have to help them recognize this victim is a mask, and they're going to do everything they can if you're the healer, because this is the game that we're playing, right? They're going to come to you as the victim, and you're going to be the rescuer. And here's what's so funny about this. If you are the type of healer who knows I can't rescue you, I'm actually going to call you on your bullshit, the victim will make you the persecutor. They will try and make you the good one, the bad one, the good one, the bad one. So you as the healer are the rescuer, the persecutor in the victim's mind, because they want to stay the game. So you want to not be either. You want to be like, I see the game you're playing. I'm neither here to rescue you nor persecute you. And the only way you can get out of that game is to heal yourself. Because if you have trauma and you have fragmented aspects, you will get something out of being the rescuer, and you will get something out of being the persecutor. So these games are not designed to address the core wound. That's what I want you to know. They are manipulative games to try and get your needs met. People play these games. So long as you are actively playing the game, the wound hasn't been healed. What's extremely helpful about understanding the drama triangle and some of the more explicit games that we play, which I'll talk about I'm not going to talk about the types of games, there's many of them, we'll talk about them in other sessions, is that they actually give us critical insight into the wounds people have. Because these are avoidance techniques, and they actually show you what wounds people are trying to avoid. The more you understand this, the more you'll be able to look at their drama triangle and go, I know what's under that. Because of how polarity works. The types of characters they take on will give you insight into what they really feel underneath it. And the critical needs that haven't been met at a fundamental level. This is actually, we won't talk about this in depth today, I'll do it later. But if somebody is playing the victim in their life more and more often, and you can see that the needs that they're getting out of being a victim is being looked after and cared about and loved, you actually get complete crystal clear clarity, insight into the fact that they're the needs that haven't truly been met. Because they're trying to get them met through this drama triangle. So you can see what type of needs that they haven't gotten met, and you can see the game they've had to create to try and get those needs met, which actually gives you insight into the exiled parts, which is what we're trying to get insight into, right? If you become aware of a drama triangle dynamic playing out within your life or in your client's life, you can use that as a doorway of insight into the inner world so that you can go in and resolve the trauma and fragmentation at the core using parts work, inner child work, and somatic healing. We'll talk more about the specific games as we move on to spiral dynamics and relationship mirrors. So just so you can breathe for a second, this is where this fits into our major diagram. Do you see that? Here's your inner world and your outer world, and it sits here. So inside of your inner categorization, inside the psyche and the nervous system is where you have fragmented and put all these parts. It plays out over here in your relationships and drama triangles. That's all I'm saying. So kind of dove into it. Now you can come out and you can see this. So when people come to you and say, I get triggered, I have problems, things aren't working. This is specifically in terms of relationships, but that's the same with a relationship to money, same with a relationship to power, to sex. If you notice that there is a drama triangle playing out over here, this is the insight. This is the big flashing flag that says, okay, you haven't resolved here. That's all you guys really need to know. That's the takeaway of this last 5 or 6 slides. If someone turns up with a trigger, problems in their relationship dynamics, they still have trauma they need to heal. That's simple. That's simple. Because I'm on such a roll here. Can you imagine all these human beings who are trying to make communities right now? Let's just make a new community, and they haven't healed their fragmentation, their trauma. Guess what? It all plays out in community. It's playing out in yourself. You haven't even healed yourself yet. And then you want to get into a relationship. You can't even manage a healthy human relationship. And so you want to go get into a community. That only makes it worse. That brings it up even stronger because you are attempting to integrate yourself. All human beings are. So we must go through this process. And this has been a conversation in my world the last week, a lot of it. There is no way to create healthy projects, communities, or relationships if you haven't healed your trauma. Full stop. No way. Zero. No way. And so many people are like, oh, let's try and get the relationship so that I feel better. Let's try and go to the community so I feel better. Let's go make that project so I feel better. Sorry, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. Now, you can do those things as a process to help you heal. But if you go in thinking you're doing that thing to get away from your trauma, you're in a land of delusion, because doing those things will bring up your trauma, including building a business. Because that's what it's all designed to do. Life wants to integrate. So the goal of parts work is to harmonize internal relationships with yourself, thereby initiating the process of harmonizing and repairing external relationships in life. In other words, the goal is to become friends with all your parts so that you can become friends with others. We didn't actually say this yet, but I gotta go back here. I'm gonna go back to this diagram here. Just because your psyche is set up like this with firefighters, managers, and these exiled parts, I want you to know that internally they fight with each other, right? It's all a safety mechanism. And ultimately, when you look at it like this, you could be like, oh, I can see how the whole system is trying to protect and look after the self. But internally, the way they do that is to fight each other in the same way that you fight people in your external world. So for instance, the manager may hate the exiled part, hate it, sees it as a threat. And so the dynamic between the manager and the exiled part may be very violent, may be very cruel inside your inner world. Your inner critic is designed to suppress these parts of you to keep you safe. And so your inner critic may be super cruel to you, especially if it's internalized, very violent tendencies from your parents or from society. So you actually fight yourself internally here. There's a huge battle going on. I'll give you a completely different example of a battle. When a firefighter turns up to protect you and a self-righteous part of you comes forward and is like, oh, the shame, the guilt. So maybe another part of you feels guilty for turning up as this firefighter, and then you have to mitigate the feeling of shame and guilt that you feel because you turned up as the firefighter. So another manager then comes through and starts to beat you up because you did something that was against your morals and your values. based on your conditioning? Can you see all this fighting that goes on inside? You fight yourself more than anybody. You fight yourself more than anybody to keep you in check, to keep you safe. Is this making more sense than it has ever made before? Good. That would be my goal. Okay. You can obviously go back and look at these slides at any time. So here, I want to run you through the 10 elements essential for building a healthy relationship with yourself. This actually comes from Friendship with God. Amazing, amazing book. So the first 3 books, Conversations with God, are all about having a conversation. At the end of the 3rd book, Neil Donald Walsh finds out he's going to write a 4th book. And he says to God, well, I thought we were only writing 3 books. And God says, if you start a conversation with someone and the conversation goes well, then we can step into friendship. So now we got to look at what are the true qualities of friendship. I just want you to listen to this. The whole book is beautiful. This is just like the most condensed version of the 10 qualities so that you can see, before I go through them, what I want you to think about is these are the qualities that you want to develop with your parts and within internally. These are the qualities. So let's begin. You want to know yourself and your parts. So knowing yourself and your parts involves developing a deep awareness and understanding of your presence in your life and in the world around you, of your parts' presence in your life. This means recognizing that you're not just a collection of thoughts and behaviors, but an integral part of every experience you encounter. It involves seeking to understand your nature, attributes, and the way in which you communicate with yourself. By knowing yourself and your parts, you become more attuned to your own inner world, from the grandeur of your aspirations to the small, seemingly insignificant moments of self-reflection. Basically, you need to know your parts deeply. Who they are, why they're here, what they're doing, what they're up to, what they think about. It's relationship work. Then you want to trust yourself. Trusting yourself and your parts is about having faith in your own inner wisdom, goodness, and plan for your life. It requires letting go of doubt and fear and believing that you are always present and supportive of yourself, even when circumstances seem challenging. Trust is built over time through experience, where you see your resilience and strength at work in your life. Trusting yourself means leaning on your inner guidance and direction. I'm going to put this in my own words. At first, you won't trust yourself because you'll think all those parts inside of you are against you. You'll think that your exile parts are against you. You'll think your firefighters are against you. You'll think your personality is against you. But the more you start to understand the setup and you start to understand, wow, even when I do that crazy psychopathic thing, it is actually just a part of me trying to protect me. And when you start to understand that everything in your system is actually trying to help you, you will start to understand why everything is the way it is. Once you understand that in yourself, you can begin to trust everything that happens. Even those crazy moments where your triggers turn up, you begin to trust it because you understand it, which will actually bring us to another quality in a second. Third one is to love yourself. What is love? Love means to care about. Love means to take you as a part of me. It means to understand that your needs are my needs. In terms of parts work, it means to find a part of yourself and understand that your parts' needs are also your needs. And you want to take that part as a part of you. That is love. So you want to love yourself. You want to embrace yourself. This means the opposite of rejection. You want to include, bring in, accept, welcome, hold, have as part of you. You want to take the most ugly aspect of you and say, would you like to come with me on the date with my friend? Not go away so that I can present myself in an inauthentic way so that they might like me, right? This is embracing. This is all of me. And that is a very hard thing to do. But it is where authenticity comes from. You want to use yourself. I love this one because this is actually about actively involving your parts in all your decision making, in your actions. You want to use your triggers. You want to use your parts to heal, to integrate, to understand. You want to use life. You want to use relationships in this way. You want to understand that a relationship with another person is not about another person making you feel good. It's about using that relationship so that that relationship can bring up your shit so that you can integrate. That's what using the relationship is. If you go into your relationship being like, you're the one who's going to complete me, you're in a state of delusion because they can't. They can only trigger the fuck out of you in order for you to complete yourself. thank you. And if you have the emotional maturity to do it with somebody, you have a good partnership. If you do not have the emotional maturity to integrate yourself, the relationship will shatter and you have to go away from each other for a while until you can handle being around each other again. Everybody is going to have little sneaky smiles at some point here because you know what I'm talking about. You want to help yourself. Helping yourself means involves participating in the work of making your inner world a better place. This idea of I'm just going to sit around and let everybody else do it for me, or it's all just going to happen, or whatever, I'm going to take the drama bus work, is bullshit. The easy bus work is what helping yourself means. It means, hey, a trigger has come up. I need to go and do some inner work. I need to actually choose to go in and transform my life. It is the opposite of avoidance. It means to go into. I'm going to give you another Teal Swan here because she put it really beautifully. Healing work is not pain relief. Pain relief is taking a painkiller to get rid of pain. Healing work is going into the pain and healing it at its core. It means resetting the fractured bone rather than putting yourself on morphine not to feel the fracture and going, it will just heal on its own if I don't reset it. No, it won't. It's the same thing with your fractured aspects. You can't just take pain relief. You can't avoid. You must go into. This is what help is. Help is going into and actually going through the pain, back through the trauma, back through hell in order to reset the bone, in order to reset the parts of yourself back in their actual place so that you can actually come out more healed and whole, more healed and whole. This is help. Understand yourself. This is my favorite one because if you understand yourself, everything else will come into play. Understanding is what I am terming expanding your consciousness. Become aware. Do you know how you understand yourself? By listening. Listening, 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 not talking, not thinking, not telling, listening. You want to go in. It's about introspection. It's about self-reflection. It is about the deepest listening you will ever do with yourself. You need to be open and being open to hearing what your parts want to tell you. Not you going in and going, well, I think I understand. You got to shut the F up and let your parts say, hey, excuse me, Mr. Know-it-all, Mrs. Know-it-all, you have no idea who I am. Let me share with you who I am. Listen. You don't know who God is. You don't know who all your parts are. You got to listen. This is actually really important because we see this play out on like an activist front where people become activists as part of the rescuer mask in order to go and rescue the victims. And they go into cultures and they go, well, I understand everything you want. And the culture goes, well, actually, no, you don't. You're just, you're sitting up there in your privileged castle feeling bad about yourself, so you want to play the rescuer coming in and rescuing this society, but you never actually ask that society, who are you, what do you want? Same with your inner work. It's external, internal. You have to listen to find out who and what your parts are. You want to listen to their desires, you want to listen to their thoughts, even if it's not what you want to hear. Because you may go deeply in and you may realize that your inner world wants something that your outer world has no desire for. Your protector selves may have convinced you that you want to be a doctor, whereas your deepest inner part actually wants to be a mother. You got to be willing to listen to your inner world rather than being stuck in your conditioning. You got to thank yourself. Gratitude. Thanking yourself and your parts is about cultivating an attitude of gratitude for the blessings and presence of all of your parts in your life. This comes naturally over time when you can actually look at your firefighters and your managers and all of this inside yourself and say, thank you for existing within me. Thank you for doing the best you possibly could to heal me. Thank you. You're actually shifting from self-rejection to acceptance and love. Forgive yourself is 9. This one happens naturally. Forgiving yourself involves letting go of any grievances, misunderstandings you might hold against aspects of yourself. You have to give up shame and guilt. Forgiveness is the giving up of shame and guilt. You have to stop blaming yourself. It all happens naturally. So, forgiveness is a big topic. People don't want to forgive their abusers in the external world, and you don't have to. It's an internal thing first. Forgiveness is, I like to say, it's a natural process that actually comes after you understand deeply enough. Understanding will lead to forgiveness. And then finally, you got to be with yourself. Being with yourself means choosing to spend quality time with your presence, with your felt sense, just being with yourself. I think I'm just going to put it like this. Know your parts, trust your parts, love your parts, embrace your parts, use your parts, help your parts, understand your parts, thank your parts, forgive your parts, and be with your parts. And if you increase the understanding, it's connected to everything else. If you embrace your parts, it's connected to everything else. If you forgive your parts, it's connected to everything else. So if you can't forgive, try to go to understanding. If you can't trust, move to helping. Right? So you don't have to forgive, because that may be not the path of least resistance, but maybe you can go to using. So this is a really nice diagram for you to think about, because this is the internal dialogue that you help people have. You got to bounce around these circles, and loving your parts translates into loving yourself, trusting yourself, loving yourself as the whole. So individual parts is now in the whole, and this now translates into knowing others, trusting others, loving others, embracing others. Then it moves into society, and that moves into nature, right? This is the relationship work. I wanted to be here 40 minutes ago, but this is the game. Next week, we will have almost the whole call just to do exercises. Before I dive into today's exercise, let me come back and see, how are you guys going? Somebody want to, okay, everybody think of one thing that you have taken out of today's slide so far that is different, unique, a shift in perspective that was an aha moment for you. Just think of one aha moment. And we're going to do it quite quickly, because I do want to get through. I want to have at least an hour of practice. So somebody share an aha moment that you had. Laura.
I loved how you dissected the protector parts into the circle diagram, because after going through this with you a couple of times now, that's new to me anyways. So I loved the way that you made it, like the steps. I always use the onion layer, right? It's just another layer of the onion that I get to work with clients. Like, it's a protect yourself. All right, are we looking with a manager? We're working with a fire. Like, how are we going to do this? It's beautiful. Thank you.
We have to think internal family systems for that one, because that's the language of internal family systems. I haven't, just as a disclaimer for anyone who ever watches the video in the future as well, I haven't studied internal family systems. I don't even know if I'm going to, but a lot of people in here want to study that and have studied that. And I think a lot of the parts work also comes from internal family systems. So I'm using that language because it's nice to know what other people are doing. And if you meet someone in internal family systems, you can understand. But what I want to say is I've talked a lot in our classes about when the psyche fragments, it fragments into two parts, the vulnerable and the protector, and the vulnerable goes in. And now what I've got from family constellations is that this protector self kind of splits into these two and shows up differently depending on how intense the pressure is. So the managers and the firefighters, which could also be called the prison wardens and the protectors, that's two topics we could call them, they show up differently depending on the level of pressure. So under extreme pressure, when you're going towards overwhelm, your firefighter will turn up, which would be a more assertive or a more obvious protector, right? I would say that most people will become aware of the firefighters before they become aware of their managers. So if you're talking with somebody in a healing or therapeutic session, they will probably, I can understand my firefighter, but they will internalize their managers as who they are. They won't know there's a problem there because it's subtle. The psyche is so clever because it doesn't want you to go to the exiled part. So it's going to probably say, well, that's just who I am. No one's going to come and be like, well, this is my manager self, unless they learn this stuff. But your manager self is the people pleaser. Your manager self is the inner critic. Your manager self is the yes person. Yeah, whatever. There's so many of them. Cool. Who else wants to share? I love that one, Laura. I got to give internal family systems some credit for that one.
Yeah, I also agree. I also love looking at the firefighters and the managers because I feel like that's something that I've been looking at within myself, is that I went through this pretty traumatic experience, and it was so easy for me to identify my firefighters. And now I'm starting to see my managers, and I'm like, oh, they're so subtle. And it's like, it's so hard to see them all. So like being able to see the diagram is like, that it helps me to like deepen my understanding of it all. And then also what you said too about the personality and how it expands out from like understanding all the different layers within that circle diagram. I really liked that too. And then also the drama triangle too.
Drama triangle is good. Let's jump in and share for a little while. You've been listening to me talk for an hour and a half, so.
I think the connection, like, because I've heard of the drama triangle before, the connection that it's the firefighters and the managers, like going back and forth, that helps so much. Just like the connection of those two.
I'm just going to put that out there. I haven't heard anybody else say that. That's my interpretation. So I believe that's right. We'll have to put it to the test. But that makes sense to me. I sat with it for probably you've seen me for like 3 hours going, how does this triangle fit with this inner circle? Because a drama triangle isn't designed to go into the exiled. So I finally was like, that is all protective. That's all protective because it looks like the victim is the exiled. And I think I got to say this again, because people are going to do this when they turn up for sessions. They're going to turn up as the victim. And they are convinced that their victim is the exiled part, but it's not, it's a game. And you can't say that to somebody at first until they get it. But a lot of people's victim mask is a manager game. It's a manager game. They're playing the victim. And it's so challenging, especially if you are the rescuer, to call somebody's victim out, because it will actually push up against all the needs you think you'll get met from actually pleasing the victim. That's a hook that we're into. And I really want to make sure that we don't, as therapists in this field, do not get stuck in that, right? And it's going to push up against all your trauma. Because if a victim comes along and you say to that person, this is your mask and you created it, and I'm not playing. I'm not here to save you. I'm not here to rescue you. You're not here to meet my needs. You're not here to validate me. And I don't care whether you heal or not is actually the goal. And that person will get very angry depending on how you do it. Especially if you have played the rescuer for them before. If you've played the rescuer for somebody before, and this actually happens in your personal relationships, and then all of a sudden you wake up and go, oh my God, I've been stuck in a drama triangle with you based on my fragmented consciousness. I have now gone in and healed some of those fragments, and I don't actually need the validation from healing you anymore or being your rescuer. And you go into a relationship dynamic with a partner or a client and say, I'm not here to validate you anymore. I'm not here to be the one to save you because you don't need saving. It will either free that person, or they will leave you and go find somebody else to play that role for them. And then you got to be okay with them leaving you. Goodness, yes, says Laura. My mom was a great example of this. My mom, to give her a huge amount of credit, I saw her as the victim in my life, and I was playing the rescuer. Anyone else tried to rescue their parents? Yeah, guilty. So I was trying to rescue my mom for a long time, whether she wanted it or not, which is the craziest thing. And I remember the day that I woke up, and she's a good, when I'm playing the rescuer, she'll play a good victim. It's a strong dynamic. I remember one day I woke up and I was like, I actually don't mind. And she was playing the I want to die card. And I said, I actually don't mind anymore. I have healed enough my relationship with death and everything that if you want to die, that's your right. Life is hard, and I understand that is a valid, desire, as you don't want to be here anymore. And I really meant it. I was like, whether you die or not, I love you, but I'm not going to try and rescue you out of your suicidal tendencies. Healed our fucking relationship. It was so good. Like overnight to friends. Cool. That was our dynamic. I think my mom is here to play a very good character in my life. She teaches me a lot about this stuff. But yeah, so it can go in that way, where the relationship actually becomes more authentic. And depending on the other person, you can actually move on into a more authentic relationship. Or if the person's too deep in their victim mentality, they will, as I said before, they will actually flip in their psyche and you will become the persecutor. I'll give you an example. You're playing the rescuer in somebody's victim game, and you wake up and realize, I'm not going to rescue you. And so you stop and you say, actually, this is yours. And they say to you, you are so fucking selfish to leave me in my moment of crisis. You should be here for me. That's how this normally looks. You're now the one who has made it so hard for me. Happens in relationship dynamics. You wake up and go, I don't want to rescue you. I'm actually going to leave this relationship. The person who plays the victim goes, how dare you leave me in my worst moment? That game starts playing. So you've gone from the rescuer to the persecutor. Now you're the one who's responsible. And that's the game I got to play. Now you're the one and you are left on the other side going, wow, yesterday I was the angel savior in their life, and today I am the worst person they have ever met. Interesting. Maybe that doesn't have to do with me. Maybe it's just that they don't want to get out of their game and I'm not playing anymore. So it's an interesting dynamic. I got to go a little bit more into this. Sorry, guys, it's so good. If you are a codependent narcissist, which most of us are in this call, which means that we get our sense of self-worth out of being a good person. If you wake up and go, I'm not rescuing you anymore, what will happen is then people will push on, now you're a bad person. And it will make you so confused at first. It will feel really challenging because you're going to go, fuck, am I meant to stay? Because now I feel like actually stepping out of the game makes me feel bad, like I am somehow a bad person for leaving this victim in their worst moment. So if you haven't healed your wound of being a bad person, you will get pulled straight back into the game because that wound will be so strong. Does that make sense? And so this is how a lot of people are going to get stuck in that loop. They're like, I've got my confidence, I'm leaving, you just hit my wound of being bad, I am now getting sucked straight back into the rescue. I'm so sorry, I was an asshole, let me look after you, here's a cup of tea. And the victim says, oh, thank you so much, you're so amazing. And you go, oh, thank you so much for validating that I'm an amazing person. Yeah, this is my role. Back in the drama triangle, off you go. And now everybody's happy. Everyone's pain body is back to where it's meant to be. You're the rescuer, your partner's the victim, and the persecutor is not here yet until you decide you want to actually gain your power back and step out again. Isn't this fun? Is it fun? It's terrifying. It's so fun and so fucking painful. This is living in hell. People living in hell. These are extremely abusive patterns, and they can be anywhere from subtly abusive to extremely motherfucking abusive, and really, really, really psychologically painful. As you know, as my beautiful friend Laura here knows from her dance in her relationship dynamic. And I was just having a conversation with Laura about this a little while ago, where, you know, Laura, so I'm not going to say all the details, but I know Laura has been going through this process of actually wanting to step out of the rescuer role, out of the game entirely. And exactly this kind of happens, you know, she'll ring me and say, am I doing the right thing? This person's really suffering. Maybe I should go back into the rescuer role. Maybe me taking my power back and stepping in the direction that I know is right for my authentic growth is actually me being selfish. Am I being selfish? So this is the challenge. Sometimes you stepping out of the game is going to feel like selfishness, depending on your construct. Fucking challenging at this point, but this is why we've got to get so good at understanding this. And you guys are going to become this in other people's lives, and I hope that I was this in Laura's life, where I said, no, actually, this is not selfishness. This is the most selfless thing you can ever do for yourself, for your family, for everyone involved, even though it's going to feel like a shattering of the ego's game.
Can I expand on that? Because there is something huge that came out of that, which I would love to share.
I would love you to.
The biggest part of that was you asked me what love would do. And I realized in those sessions with you that love is actually me staying where I am because it's protecting the other person from all of the triggered parts. Mm-hmm. Me removing myself and staying in my power was protecting them from those parts that still need to be integrated and worked with and loved on and cared for, because they didn't need to be taken out on the other person like they were taking it out on me. It was this nice dance. And so that was a really big aha for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, there's so many games that we play. It's fascinating. You've got to understand that most relationships on planet Earth are contracts right now not to go into pain. So we say, I'll get into a relationship with you if you don't make me look at my pain, and I'll stay with you, and I promise I won't push on your pain body too much. You know, this is what a lot of those relationships are based on. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to be pain relief for each other. So we kind of make this contract. We don't even know we do it. I'll validate you. I'll look after you. which is totally fine, but there is terms and conditions underneath that is, so long as you don't make me look at myself. That's the contract we have. I'll love you so long as you don't make me look at myself. And they say, the other person goes, okay, cool. I'll meet your needs and I'll love you and I'll make you feel safe so long as you don't make me look at myself. So let's have a look at a very practical one. I will provide you the house and the money so long as you don't make me look at myself. The other one says, well, I'll make sure everything's clean and I'll make your food and I'll provide you love so long as you don't make me look at myself. Now that contract on a practical level of, okay, cool, I'll provide the money, I'll provide the house cleaning, that's fine. But the terms and conditions are, so long as you don't make me look at myself. And so this is what this looks like in the relationship dynamic. The second trauma comes up, one goes, well, I'm not going to make your food anymore. I'm not cleaning anymore. And the other one goes, well, I'm not going to pay for you anymore. It's all games. It's all contracts. And so what we got to start to see is that most relationships are built on these contracts of, I'll meet your needs so long as you don't make me look at myself, so long as you don't take me into pain, and then I'll hold that over you. Because if you bring up, if any pain comes up within the relationship, I'll now take that thing away from you that I have understood is the thing that's making you want to stay with me. So we hook in. This is how the ego plays. And then that's why we fight. Because anytime pain comes up, oh, I've got that thing hanging over you. Remember, we made a contract. Remember, I'm the one who pays your bills. I pay your bills. So you want to get out of this? Well, you're going to be broke. How are you going to deal with that? That's your deepest fear. You can't provide for yourself. Fuck. Yeah, so many games. It's brave to do this work, guys. It's brave. It's loving. It's brave. And you start to recognize that love is very brave. Very brave. We also play other games. I said I'll talk about this more later, but sometimes we play the games of, I'll be the martyr to protect the other person from hurting. But actually, ultimately, it's all just games. We will see this relationship in dynamics to our children. Sometimes we want to protect our children from feeling pain. So we play the martyr. We play the sacrificer to stop the pain from our children, not understanding they're still responsible and they have the right to go through their emotional experiences. Whole new conversation. Vanessa.
So something that stood out for me was the personality parts. It did because for me, it's been such a funky navigation with personality and identity because I feel like it's always changing. And for me, it's always been shocking to see that other people aren't changing. It's like, how could they still be the same, you know? I guess it would be nice to hear you reflect, or anyone else who is constantly working on themselves, therefore their personality is always changing. Like, how does the external world deal with that for you? And how do you deal with the external world dealing in certain ways with that and reflecting it back to you?
How does the external world deal with you as you decide to change? Perfectly. Guys, this change is inevitable if you want to grow, and chaos is a part of that. Chaos is a beautiful part of transformation. So you look at I know your specific question is, how do you deal with the changes and how does the world deal with you? Do you remember in the first session where I said, when we make a shift in our inner world, the outer world needs to catch up, right? When we make sorry. Vanessa, I don't know if you were saying something, it's kind of glitching. Just remember back to one of the first sessions where I said, when we actually integrate our inner world, the external world changes, but we can't control that. We cannot control that. That is actually stepping into the unknown. So when we go through this transformation, the personality shifts, this is we're talking about recalibration here, or you know, the resurrection, the recalibration, where we have to die and be reborn. This is walking into the unknown. And the gateway through this is, I don't know who I am. I don't know who I'm going to be. I don't know other people. I don't know what's going to be on the other side. I don't know what it means for my life, my finances, nothing. You actually can't know. And so the way that you deal with this is to get so comfortable in the unknown. That's how you manage this in the most graceful way. You befriend the surprise element of life. You befriend that need. You fall in love with not knowing. You fall in love with not knowing yourself. Because if any aspect of your personality is still clinging to control, and it's getting something out of needing to know who you are and how the world will respond to your change, you will stop yourself going through that door. But it's that dance, it's that capacity to let it all go and to not know yourself. So you've got to get comfortable with the unknown. That's the best way to actually deal with it. And you do that through meditation. This is where we go into those expansive states and you realize, I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am. I don't know who anyone is. I don't know what anything is. I don't know. However, in that deep moment of extreme unknown, you hook into that innate feeling that everything's still okay. This is such a beautiful energetic state of I know nothing, but I know everything's okay. It's like you know nothing, but you know that. Does that make sense? I can't give you a more superficial answer than that because this is very real. It's very real, and yeah, it shows up in the external world in these changes, but the internal feeling of that is chaos. So you've got to, yes, relax into uncertainty. And as much as theoretically you're like, cool, that sounds good, practically that's actually terrifying. So you got to be okay with, you got to meet terror. I'm sorry, this is the hardest moment of all. I've got to say it like this: you've got to become okay with unknown, which is the same as becoming okay with dying, which is the same as becoming okay with death and terror and fear and annihilation. And this is that piece. It's a beautiful question, but the answer to it is be okay being annihilated. Luckily, I can feel most of you are very adventurous in here. It's like, cool. Like, there's something that seems mystical and beautiful about being okay in the annihilation. It's what it means to be a shadow worker. So, all right, guys, do you want to go through? Oh, wait, Lucas. Is that okay? That's a good enough answer for now?
That's lovely. And it's the only answer that I've found so far. I just switched to my phone. I don't know what's happening with my internet.
That's okay. It's lovely. I love that.
Thanks.
Lovely. Be okay being annihilated. Lovely. Lovely. It's lovely. It can be. It's a matter of perspective, really. Lucas?
Hey.
Hi.
The direct link of realizing that aspects, no matter how much I rejected them, they are my own needs. They're the same needs. Like that they are my needs. Creates this instant link of like we have something in common. Like, yeah.